Happy New Year for those who I didn't see last Sunday here. It's my prayer that may God bless you this year that is to come and continue to come. Last week, we were talking about God's presence in me, in each one of us. Today, I want to talk to you about God's presence in our family, or my family, in our families, if we make something personal. And I want to read 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 6. So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into the care of the city of David. Instead, he took to the house of Obedom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord was in the house of Obedom. So David now removed the ark from the Lord in the city of David, but David carried it inside the house of Obedom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord continued in the house of Obedom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obedom and all his household. Now, continue from last week. Now I'm not used to this glasses, because sometimes this don't I can't get used to them. I think the glasses are gonna win. For now, I'm still struggle with it. Last week we spoke God, about God's presence in us spiritually. So now I want to talk to you about God's presence in our family. You heard me speak about the conversation of God with Moses, where God pours out his heart to him, and the desire that God had to want to be present in the life, to be present in one of these, in every member of the people of Israel. One of the things that I mentioned was that God would reveal himself to the people through the tabernacle. You remember I said that he would come to the people, and the people would come when Moses shared with the people what God had shared with him. People realized the importance of needing God to be present with them. So when the tabernacle came to pass, God will reveal himself in the form of a column to the desert with a column of fire, or a column of a cloud, in the form of a cloud, visible, not as a form, not as a person, but in a form. So then, what happens? We go from there, from Exodus to 2 Samuel, where a lot of things have happened. The people of Israel have crossed the desert. They would repent, and then they would do things that wasn't pleasing to God. So what's happening now that we got here to 2 Samuel? David, let me back up a little. Let me not jump ahead too much. The tabernacle was the place where God's presence would appear and was with the people. And I forgot because I was so busy. I wanted to bring a slide of what it is. Those who have come to my house, you have seen that in my kitchen, I have a frame of the tabernacle. I taught the typological class at the Biblical Institute, where I was a pastor of, and it's one of the stories or passages that I like a lot, or my preference of the Bible, because it's the representation, the tactable. It's a because it's a tangible thing, and learning about having the presence of God live with us is very important. So the temple of the tabernacle was like a big tent, and they would they would pull it apart and put it back together each time the people would move. And the tabernacle was placed in the center of the tribes. So imagine a big campsite where thousands of people would get together and each family would put their tent. I'm going to call it like that. That was their home. Their tent around a temple or a sanctuary that was mobile, that would go everywhere, wherever they went. So what happens? From what I read last week to these verses from today, well, King Saul comes. He takes a piece of the tabernacle and starts to take it as if it was a trophy, if I can call it like that, for all the battles that he had with the towns around him. So now we arrive to this point. I just want to summarize it. That's why I encourage you. If you want to learn about the story, read them in the Bible. If you need help, then we can help you manage how to do it. So what happens? So in one of those battles, what happens with the Ark of the Covenant? That's one of the objects that was inside of the sanctuary in the most holy place where technically, and I'm going to say it this way so you can understand, it's where it's like the throne where God's presence was. And when the high priest would enter this sanctuary, on this tabernacle, it would come to the holy place here to offer sacrifice, including the priest. God's presence was revealed. So the time had passed, and now King Saul, he takes the objects of the tabernacle, and one of them, he takes it as if it was check as a good luck charm. So wherever they were going, to the in every battle, what happens now? Now that what happens now that that happened before this incident where we read. So then what happened to the ark? So the Philistines took possession of it, and it didn't go well with them. Bad things happen. Bad things happen to the Philistines. So what did the Philistines say? We can't stay here. Now I'm summarizing it. We can't stay with this because this is happening a lot of, it's harming us. So we want to turn it in. So the people of Israel during this time, they weren't building up the tabernacle like they used to. So something had happened inside of them. It looks like the people didn't worship God the same way. Like they didn't feel God's presence within them. Of course, it's a different ambience. Sometimes, before they would rebuild the tabernacle, they had it amongst them, and not anymore. And then there's a desire of them. King Saul comes in. Well, I reserve this. So, to explain later my representation of Saul. So then Saul he didn't quite serve God like he should. Now a king is coming, King David. And David wants to bring God's presence again to the people. I imagine, just like you, just like now, I talk with you and I move, within you, and I know what's happening in your lives. David, God's servant, would hear and knew that the people were feeling distant from God. So what does David does? He hears that the Philistines are trying to get rid of the Ark of the Covenant. So he gets together with the men, 30,000 told, to go bring the Ark of the Covenant and return it. But something happened that they're taking it. Let's see if I can explain it. I don't want to move because I don't speak so loud. Because if I move away from the hospital, then you will hear me. But the Ark of the Covenant and the objects of the tabernacle had some jewelry on the sides, some gems, and that's where they would insert. Oh, they had some rings on it, and they would stick some rods in it so they could carry it because it was prohibited to touch them. So they were carrying it like in the times then, marching, carrying it, 30,000 men, singing, celebrating. They had the object that had God's presence with them, and they were returning it to the town. So what happened? That it kind of rocks. What reaction do we have when something's going to fall? Speak up. We try to catch it, right? And that happened, and a life was lost because of it, because we couldn't touch it, the ark. David decides to. And he decides not to return the ark, but to leave it in this house of this man, Obed. So what happens? You heard him, Obed him. And that's how the King David's saying. He said he left it there in the house of Obed for about 3 months. The Lord has blessed the house of Obed and all that pertaineth unto him because of the ark of God. Now I want to come into this. The Ark of the Covenant had certain things inside. Had Aaron's staff. How many know the story of Aaron's staff? Yeah? Had manna. God's provisions. You listen well. The rods, Aaron's rod or staff, where God liberates or guides. The manna, God's provisions, and also the tablets of the Ten Commandments, which was the word of God. It's what God wanted for the people of Israel would do in obedience to God's. It was like a guidance for them. Oh, now I lost my place here because I started talking. I forgot where I was at. This happens all the time. So then Obedem was a Levite. Obededom, who was, he was like an average guy. It was nothing special about him. The ark, because the people of Israel knew the story. Having the ark within their homes would let them know that God's presence was there. And they would show reverence. Of course, if you know that if touching an object was gonna lose your life, you would touch it with, you would treat it with respect. And maybe that's how they felt in their homes. But they felt something more because of the stories that they've heard. That it was a moral culture. Just like in our countries, you would tell what a great grandmother said, what grandmother. Don't stop telling the stories from your family. That's something that happens here in this story is that we lose the essence of who we are. And something about the people of Israel who were hard of service, but would always tell their stories. And they know about the God of Israel who had opened the sea, who had given food in the desert. The children would hear the stories and they would know. So in the moment of Obed-Edom, knowing that he had this object in his home, what do you think he would starts to happen there? I think something type like when persons when they hear that I'm a pastor or a priest go to a restaurant and he's got his dress as a girl. There's like a change of attitude in the people. I'm telling you, I lived in Fort Myers. We used to live across the street from the pastor where we lived, that we used to be a pastor of, and it was a neighborhood that was very poor. A lot of Afro Americans, a lot of Latins, very few whites in that area, and the Afro Americans, they're very similar to Hispanics in a lot of things. When they see a woman, and I would cross from the house to the church, always to church. I was always well dressed, or sometimes I was very cross. It was because I had a meeting with someone, or I had an appointment with someone, or I had a meeting. And some people, black guys from the Uruguay, they see me, and they start the catcalling. We started calling them, compliments. And I wasn't going to say anything, but I stopped, and I looked, and I said, "Please be more respectful, because I'm the pastor of this church." And when I said that to them, their eyes popped open like those cue balls. Oh, we're sorry, we didn't know you were the pastor of this place. I think they had another ideas because they would do a lot of stuff, a lot of mischievous things, stealing. So at the moment, I said I was a pastor because of what the catcalling that we're doing. But to tell them that they're more, that I'm a pastor, to be a little more respectful, and just think about what they're going to do. I think as humans, when there's an acknowledgement that there's something that represents God's presence, or a person who represents God in some homes that have their Bible and it's open, as if it was a gift of respect. Our attitudes change. We start to think, when we're going to do something, we think about it twice. There are change the way we are. I imagine, and I'm just suspecting here, I'm just taking my imagination, that in the house of Obed, something similar might have happened. There was like an adjustment of attitude, if I can call it like that. There was an adjustment in the way of thinking, an adjustment on how I make decisions, and how I take action. I don't think that the blessing to the home of Obed Edom came because of the object that was covered in gold but made of wood. I dare to say the blessing came because having that object in the home, there was a change in attitude and a change of being of Obed Edom and his family and those that were in there. Because the object was a symbol of God's presence. Where am I going with this? Last week, you see how I'm walking right with you. Last week, God's presence, New Year, before the week before, a new year, new you. Last week, God's presence in me, in you, in each one of us. Today, if God's presence is with me, as you are in home, where's God's presence? In your home. Multiply God's presence in Brother Francisco's home, in Mary Cruz, in Paco, in each one of you, the boys, right? If God's presence is there, multiplied in each one of them. There has to be a blessing because God's presence is making you recognize and it's adjusting your way of thinking and your way of behaving. How I speak, how I behave, what do I say, how do I do it? Francisco, how do you talk to Maricruz? If God's presence is in you, you have to talk to her tenderly. You have to talk to her in a tender way, right? It doesn't mean that we can't get mad, that we don't get mad. But even though the way I respond, even though I'm angry or anger, it's not the same that when you do it when you didn't have God's presence in you. There's a change. Not only in me. If God's presence is in me, it's in my home, there's a change, a total change. And that change produces a blessing. So when God's people, so in this people, when the house of the Lord was in the home of Obed Edom, it's because there was a change in them. God's presence in my family reflects a change in which each member of it sees and recognizes it, that there's something different. There's something superior. There is a presence that cannot be explained within our home. And with that, fortunately, it is also experienced the blessing that the couple gets along better. Well, father with child, mother with child. And it's also the blessing that we learn to manage our money in a different way. Now our money isn't used the way it was. Now we think about how we're going to use it, right? We analyze it. And God multiplies it. And multiplies His blessings and blesses our home and heals. Not only the nucleus of the family, of the family, can testify of the presence of God, but the neighbor that's looking testifies of God's presence. Because if before you were yelling and fighting, the neighbor would hear it. The neighbor maybe didn't say anything, but he would hear. Or the neighbor who's always washing dishes and looks through the window. Oh, she hit her husband with the pan. Now she's seeing. It's been a while since so-and-so hasn't hit her husband with the frying pan. It's been a while since I heard any yelling in that home. They're starting to see God's presence in our families. It is necessary. because it's a blessing not only for us but also for our family nucleus, for our partners, for our children, the families that are outside. I'll leave you with this. God bless you. Francisco, I want you to pray for the say a prayer for the prayer request.